In the village of Ndaru, nestled between cracked hills and stubborn patches of green, there lived a girl named Emily. 17 years old, skin the color of storm-soaked bark, eyes like burnt honey, and hair knotted with leaves no matter how often she combed it. Emily had not chosen the life she lived. It was handed to her the day her mother disappeared and her father died, on the very day she was born. Whispers had filled the air that morning, like smoke curling into the thatched rooftops. She came out screaming as he took his last breath, said one elder. The gods marked her at birth, said another. From that moment, no one in Ndaru looked at her without lowering their gaze or spitting beside their feet. Her stepmother, a sharp-faced woman named Nantal, never hid her resentment. She had married Emily's father just months before he was found dead under a fig tree, mouth full of blood and eyes wide open. Rumor had it he'd gone mad. Nantal had 2 daughters of her own, both as bitter as the marula fruit before ripening, and they took joy in reminding Emily that she didn't belong. While they slept on woven mats stuffed with feathers and perfumed with crushed hibiscus petals, Emily was made to sleep in the goat pen behind the house. The pen was made of crooked wood and mud, barely high enough to stand in, its thatched roof sagging from years of neglect. It stank of dung, sour milk, and damp straw. Yet, within that smell and squalor, Emily found her own kind of peace. Among the goats was one she favored above the others, an old one-eyed creature she named Luma. He had a torn ear and walked with a limp, but he would rest his head in her lap each night, grunting softly like he was trying to tell her stories no one else remembered. During the day, Emily worked. She fetched water from the stream, chopped wood, scrubbed floors until her fingers bled, and ate only what was left after her stepmother and stepsisters had picked the best of the food. She never complained. Not out loud. But her silence held the weight of a storm that never broke. The villagers, though they pitied her, kept their distance. Some claimed her left eye changed color during the full moon. Others swore the crows followed her when she walked alone. Emily had learned not to weep in front of others, but at night, when the stars blinked cold and indifferent above her, the tears would come. She would press her face into Luma's woolly neck and let herself cry, quiet, choking sobs. And it was on these nights that strange things began to happen. The wind would still, as if holding its breath. The trees around the pen would fall into an unnatural silence, not a single leaf rustling. Sometimes, the goats, sleepy, irritable creatures, would rise from their slumber, walk in slow circles, and kneel around Emily as though in prayer. Their heads bowed, unmoving, their eyes open and strangely aware. She once awoke to find a ring of white pebbles placed around her by unseen hands. She never spoke of it. Not even to Luma. Whatever was happening, it wasn't meant for the others to know. It wasn't meant for words. Emily carried inside her a quiet strength that no one in the village noticed. She had learned to listen, not just with her ears but with her whole being. She could sense when rain was coming before the clouds gathered. She knew which herbs to crush into paste for a cut or how to stroke a goat's belly to turn a breech birth. She spoke little, but her eyes held questions older than the village itself. Some said she had her grandmother's stare, the one who was burned as a witch many years before. The only time she allowed herself to dream was when Luma leaned against her and the stars seemed close enough to touch. She dreamed of running, not away, but toward something. A forest, a song, a voice calling her by a name she had never heard but somehow recognized. When she woke, the name would slip from her mind like water through cupped hands. One evening, while returning from the stream with a calabash of water balanced on her head, she heard her stepmother's voice. She stopped behind the hut, hidden by tall reeds. Nantal's tone was low but laced with venom. "She's not natural," Nantal said. "The girl dreams things that come true. Last week I saw the rooster bow at her feet. Did you see the goat that died? No wound, no sickness. Just dead with its eyes open." One of the stepsisters replied, voice shrill and eager, "Maybe she'll run away. She's almost old enough." Nantal hissed, "No, she won't run. She belongs in the forest now. The same place her mother vanished to. I'll send her before the next moon. Let her join her kind, spirits, beasts, whatever she is." Emily stood frozen. The water spilled from the calabash and soaked the ground, unnoticed. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from something older, deeper. The forest. The word made something stir in her bones. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an answer. That night, as she lay beside Luma in the pen, her cheek pressed to his side, she didn't cry. The goats rose again, silently kneeling around her. But this time, she kept her eyes open. And she whispered into the darkness, "I hear you. Whoever you are. I'm ready." The night before her banishment, a peculiar hush swept through Nauru. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears like thick wool, no crickets chirping, no rustle of leaves, not even the distant howling of dogs. Even the goats, restless by nature, were unusually still. The air hung heavy with something unspoken. A waiting. Emily sensed it the moment she crawled into the pen, the cold earth biting at her knees, the damp straw crunching beneath her. Luma nuzzled her side, but even he seemed tense, ears perked toward the windless dark. She lay on her back, arms crossed over her chest, and stared up at the stars hidden behind thick clouds. Tomorrow, they would lead her into the forest, the one place everyone feared, except the dead and the mad. Her stepmother had already begun preparing. She'd sharpened a walking stick and muttered to herself about ropes, charms, and never looking back. Emily cried that night, not the broken sobs of a girl afraid, but the heavy tears of someone being called somewhere she didn't yet understand. Her cheek pressed against Luma's back, her fingers tangled in his matted fur, she whispered to no one, "If I belong somewhere else, then let it find me before they do." And then, it happened. It started with a cold breath of wind that rolled through the pen, brushing over her skin like silk. Luma stirred, snorted, and stood up with a sharp grunt. Emily opened her eyes. They were not alone. Around her, nestled within the shadows, were eyes, dozens of them, flickering like amber coals in the dark. They weren't goat eyes. They blinked slowly, deliberately. And they moved. Figures crawled along the ground on hands and feet like beasts, but their shapes were undeniably human. Their skin shimmered, shifting like dust in moonlight, and their limbs bent in ways that were too fluid for the living. Emily didn't scream. Her breath caught in her throat, but not from fear. It felt like coming home. One of the forms crept closer, tall and slender with moss hanging from its shoulders like a shawl. Its face was featureless save for the glowing eyes and the outline of lips that never fully opened, yet still whispered. "She who remembers," it said. Then another, "She who listens." And another, "The blood of wind and stone." The whispers rose like a chant around her, circling her in a spiral of names, some she recognized from forgotten dreams, others that sent shivers down her spine. Names that echoed in her bones. A girl of 17 should have wept. Should have screamed. But Emily only closed her eyes and let the words wash over her like warm rain. They didn't touch her, yet she felt their presence wrap around her, like arms of smoke and memory. They told her nothing and everything at once. She saw flashes, her mother's face, blurry and wild-eyed, vanishing into green shadows. Her father coughing blood into his hands while a crow watched from a fig branch. A hidden mark beneath her ribs that glowed like fire in the right light. She felt herself breathing with the earth, the animals, the sky. And then it ended. As suddenly as they came, the glowing eyes vanished. The wind returned. The goats stirred, bleating softly. Luma lay beside her again, as if nothing had happened. Emily blinked into the darkness, her heart calm and slow. Had it been a dream? She didn't sleep again. She watched the sky lighten from black to navy, then to gray. When the sun finally cracked open the horizon, she sat up and looked around. That's when she saw them, footprints. Dozens of them, large and small, circling the pen in messy patterns. They weren't goat prints. They were human. Bare feet, some wide and long, others small and pointed. And then she noticed something stranger still, where the prints passed through patches of mud or dung, flowers had sprouted. Tiny white blossoms, no bigger than a fingernail, with a faint scent of sage. She stood slowly. Her body ached, but there was a lightness in her chest she couldn't explain. She looked down at her hands. They were dusted in pale powder, shimmering faintly. She sniffed her skin. Sage. The scent clung to her like a second skin. She didn't hear them coming. She only realized they were there when the pen gate creaked open and her stepmother gasped sharply. Emily turned. Nantel stood frozen, both daughters behind her, faces pale and drawn. Behind them, a few neighbors had gathered, drawn by curiosity and unease. Emily stood in the middle of the pen, barefoot and glowing faintly in the early morning light. The one-eyed goat Luma stood by her side like a sentinel. "What have you done?" Nantel whispered. Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her presence was answer enough. Someone shouted, "Look at her hands. That's witch dust." Another voice, trembling, "I saw her crying last night." And then, silence. She summoned them. Spirits. They call her she who remembers. I heard her talking to herself the other day. It took only moments for awe to curdle into fear. The people of Nauru had always whispered about Emily, but now the whispers had turned into trembling accusations. She's not one of us. She's a child of the forest. A witch. By midday, Emily was dragged from the pen, her arms held by two of the stronger village women. Her stepmother trailed behind, speaking in low, venomous tones about curses, omens, and the death of her husband. The chief had to see this. It was no longer enough to send her away. Now they needed to be sure she would never return. As they led her down the main path of the village, villagers stared from their doorways, some with pity, most with fear. Children hid behind their mothers. Dogs barked, then whimpered and lay flat on the ground. Emily walked barefoot through the dust, the scent of sage trailing behind her. Her heart did not pound with terror. She did not beg or cry. Her eyes remained forward, calm and certain. Because now she remembered, just enough to know that she had not been alone in the night. And that whatever was calling her wasn't finished yet. The village council sat beneath the twisted fig tree, their faces etched with lines carved from years of drought, harvests, and old superstitions. The crowd of villagers pressed in tight, buzzing with fear and excitement. Children were hushed, goats tugged at their leashes, and all eyes were fixed on Emily, barefoot, wrists tied with vine rope, her face calm beneath a thatch of tangled hair. She looked almost serene, a strange peace on her lips that only deepened the villagers' unease. "She must be tested," the chief declared. His voice was hoarse, not from age but from a soul tired of fighting ghosts. "Let the spirits judge her." Emily didn't flinch. An old woman, Mama Kais, stepped forward with a bowl of red ochre and painted symbols across Emily's forehead and arms. "If she is innocent, the fire will spare her," the elder said. "If she is cursed, the flames will consume her." A space was cleared in the village square, and the fire pit, normally reserved for ceremonial blessings, was prepared for judgment. They stacked dry acacia wood soaked in herbs and oils. Flames crackled to life, growing taller than a man's shoulder, flickering with tongues of orange, red, and blue. Nia, Emily's stepsister, lingered by the edge. Her lips curled in a practiced expression of concern, but her eyes betrayed her. In the commotion, she had slipped extra resin into the woodpile, tree sap that made the flames cling, burn longer, hotter. She whispered to her mother, "She won't come back from this." Emily stood before the blaze, the heat painting her cheeks with sweat. Her wrists were untied, but her dignity remained bound. The air pulsed with anticipation. She could feel the villagers willing her to burn, not out of cruelty, but from fear. They needed her to be the monster they believed she was. "Walk," the chief said, his eyes like cold stone. She stepped forward. The fire roared. And then, it split. The flames, alive and hungry a moment before, bowed away from her as if parting for royalty. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, and the fire danced aside in two shimmering walls. Emily walked between them slowly, deliberately, her bare feet brushing warm ashes, but never blistering. The smoke curled around her like a lover's embrace, and for a moment, time froze. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mama Kais dropped her prayer beads. Even the chief stood. She emerged from the other side untouched, her skin unmarked, her dress smelling faintly of burnt sage and honey. Her eyes met the villagers, and for a moment, they saw her, not as a cursed child, not as a witch, but as something holy. Then the chief's voice shattered the silence. "She is no child of man," he declared. "She walks like the forgotten spirits, those that twist memory and steal the breath of ancestors. She is not ours." Confusion murmured through the crowd, but fear was a faster poison. And Nia, ever quick with poison of her own, cried, "You saw the fire bow to her. That's not a girl, that's a shadow wearing her skin. She's not human. Exile her before it's too late." The chief raised his staff. "Let the forest take her. If she truly belongs to the spirits, they will welcome her." And so they bound her again. That night, as the moon rose behind clouds thick with rain, Emily was dragged to the edge of the forbidden forest, a place spoken of in hushed tones and stories meant to keep children indoors. It was not just the trees that frightened people, but what lay beneath them. The wind never blew the same way there. Paths disappeared. Those who entered seeking vengeance or answers never returned. And those who wandered in by mistake often came back wrong. They tied Emily to the trunk of a large fig tree, the vines laced with salt and river clay to confuse the spirits. No one kissed her cheek or left her with water. They tied her tight and walked away in silence. Nia lingered the longest, watching Emily through narrowed eyes. "Now we'll see what your spirits think of you," she whispered. Thunder cracked above. Lightning sliced the sky like a blade. And then she was alone. The rain came in fat drops, washing away the red ochre from her skin. Her hair clung to her face, her body shivering against the bark. But she didn't cry. Not this time. Not now. Because something in her chest stirred, warm and steady like a heartbeat. The forest was not angry. It was awake. Then, from the shadows, the eyes appeared. Not one. Not 10. Dozens. Maybe more. Amber and gold, they blinked in unison, surrounding her in a wide circle. Their forms crawled from the mist, some tall and draped in vines, others short with bones strung around their necks. All humanoid, yet not human. And yet not terrifying. One stepped forward, taller than the rest, with skin like rain-soaked bark and antlers blooming from his head like a crown. They dropped to their knees. Every single one. The air pulsed with reverence. Not menace. Not hunger. The antlered one spoke, not with a voice, but with thought. It filled her ears, her mind, her blood. "We have waited, she who remembers. The world forgot us. But you remembered." Lightning crashed again, but Emily did not flinch. Her bonds slipped from her wrists, crumbling into ash. Her feet touched the wet earth, and it welcomed her like a mother would a lost child. She took a deep breath, filled with the scent of moss, bark, and memory. The forest had spoken. And she would listen. The forest swallowed sound. No birds chirped. No twigs snapped beneath their feet. Only the rustle of ancient breath stirred the leaves above, and the quiet padding of feet, some human, some not, guided Emily deeper into a world no villager dared to touch. The rememberers moved in eerie grace, their bodies barely touching the ground, their glowing eyes never blinking. Emily followed without fear, her bare feet treading roots that pulsed faintly, as though the earth beneath remembered her. They came to a clearing encircled by 7 towering baobab trees, each older than time, their trunks marked with thousands of tiny eyes carved into the bark. The largest tree bore a hollow at its base, within which burned a gentle flame, not fire, but memory, warm and blue and alive. The antlered rememberer, the one who had untied her bonds with a thought, turned to her. "You are not the first, Emily. But you may be the last." She didn't speak. Her mouth was dry, but not from fear. It was awe. The air was thick with something she couldn't name, like breath and history intertwined. He continued. "This forest is the last cradle of memory. Before your people were broken, before their names were turned to curses, they ruled this land through knowing. They were the mothers of echo, women who could speak with beasts, with stars, with soil. You are their seed. And you've remembered enough to awaken us. Emily felt it then, the hum in her bones, the sensation of being watched by her own bloodline. It was as if dozens of voices whispered through her skin, not in fear, but in welcome. Each rememberer took a turn guiding her through a different lesson. One led her to a pond that reflected not her face, but that of a woman in ochre paint, cradling a jaguar. She is your great-grandmother's sister, the spirit whispered. She died with her name trapped in silence. Free it. Emily touched the surface, and the woman sang. The sound shivered through her bones, and Emily found herself repeating the melody without knowing how. It was a song of naming, of belonging. The water lit up with stars. Another taught her to place her hand against the bark of a tree and listen. Not with ears, but heart. She began to hear voices, scenes from centuries past, a child climbing the branches for a fruit that no longer grew, a mother weeping beneath its shade, a battle cry lost in the leaves. The tree wept sap as she listened. She began to speak to the animals of the forest, not in words, but in breath and glance and feeling. Luma, the one-eyed goat who had followed her to the forest edge, now appeared by her side like a guardian. The rememberers said nothing of this, but Emily noticed how they bowed their heads when Luma passed. Some nights, she dreamed not of her own life, but of lives long buried. She would wake in tears, mourning a daughter she never birthed, or singing lullabies in languages she'd never spoken aloud. These were not visions, they were memories seated in her bones. One rememberer, cloaked in feathers, took her to the bones of an ancient lion buried beneath the roots of a tree. He died with truth in his jaws, the spirit said. Touch him. When her fingers brushed the skull, she gasped, visions exploded behind her eyes. She saw her ancestors marching in golden garments, beasts walking beside them like kin. She saw betrayal too, a sister who sold their names to those who feared them. A fire. A forgetting. Emily wept. They erased us. No, said the antlered one. They hid you inside yourself. Until now. Meanwhile, far beyond the sacred canopy, the village of Naru was unraveling. It began subtly. A cow refused to give milk. Then 3 chickens were found dead, laid in a perfect circle, their eyes open and unclouded, as if they had seen something too much for this world. Nia began waking up screaming. She said she dreamed of being buried alive in a pit of roots that whispered her name over and over. Her mother, the stepmother, dismissed it as guilt, but her lips trembled as she said it. Soon after, the woman developed a strange fever. Her skin paled. Her hair thinned. She muttered names no one recognized, clutching her chest as though something ancient twisted inside it. And then, the dreams spread. Villagers began waking from sleep gasping, drenched in sweat, unable to recall what had terrified them, only that they had seen eyes. Eyes that watched. Eyes that remembered. The chief called for cleansing rituals. Goats were sacrificed. The village's healer mixed bitter roots into tea, but the nightmares worsened. One boy was found sleepwalking toward the forest, whispering Emily's name. Whispers spread like fire in dry grass. Her spirit is cursing us. She walks with forgotten gods. She should have burned. And yet, no one dared enter the forest to search for her. Back beneath the baobabs, Emily stood stronger now. Her hair braided with feathers, her skin painted in ashen memory. She was not the frightened girl from the goat pen. She was something else. Something becoming. The rememberers led her to a wide flat stone covered in carvings that pulsed with light. They called it the Stone of Listening. There, she saw her life laid out, moments she had lived, and moments her blood had carried. Her mother's sorrow. Her father's final breath, holding her as a storm raged above. The stepmother's jealousy. The village's fear. She saw all of it. And she did not look away. You are ready, the antlered one said. Ready for what? She asked. To make them remember. Emily turned toward the village, beyond the trees, beyond the river, past the whispering winds. For generations, they had buried truth beneath fear. But memory could not rot forever. It grew like roots under earth, until one day it broke through the soil, reaching for light. And she was the light. The forest rustled in agreement. The spirits hummed. Emily stepped forward. She had remembered enough. Now it was time they did too. The memories came not as dreams now, but as floods. Emily could stand still in the forest, close her eyes, and see the village of Naru, not as it was, but as it used to be. The memories rose from the earth like steam, painting images in the mist. A village shaped from red clay and reed, women in blue robes dancing in moonlight, their voices weaving magic through the wind. She saw her ancestors living not in shame, but in song. The land had known them, loved them, fed them in return. Until it turned dark. The betrayal came like a knife in the back, slow and deliberate. The vision showed her, a council of men, eyes hardened with fear and envy, conspiring to silence the women who could hear the stars. They branded them witches, spread lies, stole their sacred animals, and burned their memory into ash. And the worst of it? These men were not strangers, they were the forefathers of the very villagers who now walked Naru's dusty paths with pride, never knowing the soil beneath them was soaked with erased truth. Emily's heart thundered. The villagers had been living on stolen peace. Their lies built the village, the rememberers told her, voices quiet as rustling leaves. Now it bends under the weight of what it tried to forget. You must decide. Will you restore truth, even if it burns the walls they trust? Or let their world rot gently into ruin? She said nothing. Not yet. Instead, she knelt beside Luma, whose one eye reflected the stars. They never saw me, she whispered. Only you did. That night, she stood barefoot at the edge of a spirit pool, stars caught in the water like shattered glass. She whispered her pain into the surface, every tear shed in the goat pen, every hunger pang, every bruise, every ache of being invisible. And the water listened. With her voice wrapped in memory, Emily sent a breath into the sky, one that carried dreams like seeds into sleeping minds. Back in Daru, the villagers began to dream. It started with children. They awoke screaming, saying they'd seen a girl crying in a pen made of bone, her tears glowing like fire, her hands reaching out. Then the mothers began to toss and turn, moaning in their sleep. Fathers clutched their chests and cried in languages they did not speak. And the goats, once gentle and meek, began to stare. Always at the same direction. Always where the forest stood. Nia was the first to unravel. She rose one night and walked barefoot through the village, eyes open but unseeing. She stood by the old goat pen and whispered Emily's name, over and over again. Her voice cracked with guilt, but she couldn't stop. The stepmother tried to pray, tried to cleanse the house with smoke and bitter herbs, but the fire in the hearth wouldn't light. Shadows clung to the corners of their walls. She began hearing hooves on the floorboards, even when no goats were near. Mirrors cracked. Milk soured in her hands. Her hair began to fall in clumps. Whispers followed her now. At market, on the path to the well, behind closed doors. Witch's keeper. Goat-hearted mother. She didn't burn. She became. Even the chief grew restless. He dreamt of being surrounded by thousands of glowing eyes, human, animal, and something else, watching him from the trees. A voice whispered, "You knew the truth. And you silenced it." Panicked, he traveled by night to find a rogue diviner who lived beyond the river, a woman the council had exiled years ago for naming truths too loudly. He begged her for insight. The diviner touched his hand, and her eyes rolled back. "The eyes have woken," she said hoarsely. "The forgotten will not remain silent. Your dreams are only the beginning. The one you banished walks in memory now. And memory never forgets." Back in the forest, Emily felt the shift. The village had begun to fracture. But not from hatred, not yet. From fear. And guilt. Still, that wasn't enough. A reckoning must be more than punishment. It must be truth made visible. So she returned. Not in flesh, but in spirit. Her form walked unseen through Ndaru as people slept. She wandered through homes, watched the breath of the living tremble in their sleep. She paused outside her old house, the one where laughter had never lived. Inside, Nia whimpered, curled up on the floor like a child, sweat soaking her dress. The stepmother sat wide-eyed by the door, muttering to herself, clutching a wooden spoon like it could fend off spirits. Emily entered the goat pen last. It was smaller than she remembered. But still whole. Still sacred. She knelt, placed a hand on the earth, and called them, the only ones who had ever listened. The goats came, one by one, quiet and solemn. Luma first, then the others. They circled her, their eyes calm, deep, ancient. She leaned in, whispering not in words, but in memory. She told them of fire and lies. Of sisters who hated. Of blood that remembered. Of a girl who cried, and how the wind itself used to pause to listen. And they listened again. When dawn broke, the goats wandered through the village as they never had before, each one pausing outside homes, staring. Their eyes no longer dull, but sharp with something the villagers couldn't name. The old woman selling maize began to tremble. Their eyes, she said. They look like hers. The children followed the goats. The parents followed the children. And by noon, half the village stood outside the goat pen, watching the animals kneel, as if in mourning, or reverence. Something was coming. Emily stood at the edge of the trees, unseen, but not unfelt. The truth would not stay buried. And the goats, her first witnesses, had carried her voice. The morning began not with birdsong or rooster cries, but with silence, so thick and absolute it stole breath from the air. The people of Ndaru village stepped outside one by one, blinking under the early sun, sensing something unnatural had settled over their land. Then the gasps began. All around the village square, goats stood upright on their hind legs, unnatural, yet eerily balanced, as if they had always known how to do it. Their hooves were planted firmly in the dust, but their backs straightened, shoulders poised. Most haunting of all were their eyes, golden, gleaming like molten suns. They formed a perfect circle around the chief's hut, their faces tilted slightly upward, as if in worship or warning. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. Elders crossed their chests and muttered prayers. Even the warriors did not move forward. No one dared break the ring. Then came the wind, though no trees swayed. It moved like breath through bone. From the edge of the forest, a figure emerged. Emily. But not the Emily they had once cast out. She was taller now, or perhaps just heavier with power. Her body shimmered with a translucent aura, robes spun from vines and silk-like leaves clung to her form, fluttering though there was no breeze. Her eyes were clearer than any river, and her feet barely touched the ground as she walked. She passed through the village, barefoot and silent, and every goat she moved past bowed its head. The crowd parted like water. Some whispered her name, others dropped to their knees, not from reverence, but from a deep, ancestral terror, the kind that comes when the past returns for its due. Emily stopped at the center of the circle. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, yet it reached every ear, every window, every crack in every wall. The land remembers, she said. Even when you forget. And now it has sent me to speak what you tried to bury. The chief stepped out of his hut, face pale, staff shaking in his grip. He tried to speak, but no words came. Emily turned to him and raised a hand. You will not speak until the truth does. You have worn silence like a crown. That crown is rotted. With a soft chant, she bent and pressed her palms into the dirt. The ground trembled. The air shifted. Then, like mist unraveling, visions bloomed in the space between them. They floated through the air like smoke, living memories woven into form. The villagers saw their ancestors, not as distant names but as moving, breathing people. They saw women in blue robes weaving moonlight into baskets. They saw children singing to trees. They saw a thriving community, ruled by memory, not greed. Then came the betrayal. Men gathering in secret. Fear twisting their features. Their power is unnatural, one said. They speak to animals, but not to us. Another, they know when we lie. That is dangerous. And another, if we do not end them, we will never rule. They watched as the women were hunted, branded as witches, stoned, burned, buried in shallow graves. They saw the sacred goat herd stolen, symbols of the matriarchy turned into mere livestock. Songs became screams. Magic became shame. The tree of memory was felled, its roots poisoned with silence. The villagers sobbed. They clutched one another. They turned away from the images, but the memories followed them. They floated into homes, seeped into doorways, carved themselves into walls. Then Emily turned to her stepmother. The woman had grown gaunt over the past moons, her eyes shadowed, her skin pale. But now she stood under the weight of 1,000 eyes and trembled as Emily's gaze met hers. "Speak," Emily said. The stepmother choked, shook her head, but her mouth opened, and words spilled like floodwater. I killed him," she croaked. "Emily's father. I poisoned him when I saw the light in her eyes. I knew what she was. I knew she was one of them. I feared what she would become." Gasps rippled through the villagers. The chief staggered back. She was too powerful to be raised, the stepmother wept. "So I told them she was cursed. I made her sleep in the pen. I thought if I buried her low enough, the power would die." Emily said nothing. She stepped past the woman and walked toward the pen where she had once wept alone under cold stars. She looked down at the dirt where her tears had fallen for years. Then she bent and touched the earth once more. This time, the land did not tremble, it exhaled. A deep hum echoed from the soil. The goat pen began to split, not violently, but gracefully, like a wound opening to release truth. From the center of the pen, a sapling burst forth. But it did not grow slowly. It rose like it had been waiting, stretching skyward in seconds, bark pulsing with golden light. Its branches unfurled like arms, and leaves shaped like eyes shimmered under the sun. Then came the fruit, dozens of them, glowing softly, each a different hue. They hung low, pulsing gently like heartbeats. As the villagers watched, the fruits whispered. Each one called out a name, names long forgotten, names of ancestors erased. Emily turned to the crowd. For every ancestor forgotten, the land grew hollow. Now the tree remembers what you would not. Each fruit is a memory. If you eat it, you will see what they saw. Feel what they felt. The goats knelt before the tree, bowing. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, quietly, an elder stepped forward. He was the oldest man in the village, nearly blind, hunched from years. He reached out a trembling hand and picked one glowing fruit. He placed it to his lips and bit. He gasped. Then wept. He dropped to his knees and bowed before Emily. "We were wrong," he said. "We were so wrong." One by one, the villagers followed. By dusk, the tree was nearly bare, and Daru was filled with people crying, not in fear, but in release. The weight of centuries had finally broken. And Emily? She stood beneath the tree, the wind dancing through her robes of leaf and breath. The land had spoken. And it had remembered. The sun paused above the horizon, neither rising nor setting, as if the heavens themselves were waiting. A heavy stillness wrapped the village of Daru, different from any silence before. It wasn't the absence of sound, it was the stilling of time. The rememberers emerged from the forest. They did not walk, they glided, tall and slender, draped in cloaks made of fog and feathers, their eyes flickering like ancient stars. They moved in complete synchrony, a wall of memory made flesh. Their faces shimmered, changing with each blink, as though every soul they'd ever guarded was looking through them at once. The villagers, frozen in awe and fear, watched as these figures spread out along the border of the village. No one could move past them. No wind stirred. Even the birds in the sky had stopped mid-flight, suspended like painted brushstrokes in air. Emily stood at the center, the tree of memory behind her, its fruitless branches glowing dimly like a heartbeat after exertion. She raised her voice, not in anger, but in a terrible calm. "You have taken from the earth," she said. "You have stolen breath from names. You turned memory into silence. But now, the land has remembered." Her voice echoed unnaturally far, reaching every ear, even those who tried to block it with trembling hands. "You have one chance," she continued. "Restore the names of the forgotten. Speak the truth of what your ancestors did. Only then will your children see a future." No one dared object. Not even the warriors, whose spears lay useless at their feet. So they began to gather, under the great tree born from the goat pen. The rememberers encircled them, silent sentinels of judgment. That night, the village held its first ceremony of naming. Every family was called forward, one by one. At the base of the tree, they knelt, and spoke aloud not their glory, but their shame. "I am the daughter of Cabo, who helped burn the moonspeakers. My grandfather was one who buried the truth. He said the tree had no roots. My mother turned in her sister when she began to hum the ancestral songs. She was taken in chains. I never saw her again." With every confession, the wind stirred. The branches of the tree rustled, and from the shadows beyond, spirits emerged. They were not horrifying, but they were powerful. Ethereal and glowing, they hovered over the confessors, some weeping, some nodding with grave kindness. When a truth was spoken sincerely, the spirit touched the speaker's head gently and dissolved into the air, like mist after rain. But not all were forgiven. One family spoke a lie, blaming another. A spirit screamed and cracked the ground beneath them, exposing bones wrapped in violet cloth. The villagers recoiled in terror. The family collapsed in grief, realizing their ancestors' sins could not be hidden beneath words. The tree glowed brighter with every truth, its roots writhing under the soil, alive with energy. Then came the chief's turn. He stood rigid, eyes flickering from Emily to the rememberers. He tried to speak, but no sound came. Not even lies. Emily stepped forward. "The roots know your story," she said. "Do not waste breath." The chief turned, suddenly sprinting toward the edge of the village, his feet pounding against the dust. But he did not get far. The roots of the memory tree burst from the ground like serpents and snared his legs. He screamed, clawing at the earth, but it swallowed him whole. In seconds, he was gone, no grave, no name. The tree quieted. Then Emily turned to her stepmother and sisters. Their faces were masks of fear and fury. But she did not rage. She only looked at them, and they fell to their knees. "Not death," Emily said softly. "But a lesson." She raised her hand, and the goats moved as one, herd-like, but no longer just animals. Their eyes still glowed with the golden memory of their matriarchal bond. "You made me sleep among them, thinking them beasts," she said to her stepmother. "But they listened when no one else did. They remembered when you forgot." She gestured once, and the rememberers opened a path toward the forest. "You will live among them," she declared. "Not as rulers, but as kin. Until you learn humility, until you listen to the silence you forced on others." Her stepmother tried to speak, tried to plead, but the forest called louder than her cries. The goats flanked them, guiding them toward the trees. The shadows swallowed them whole. Only then did Emily turn back to the village. The rememberers bowed. The goats knelt one final time. And Emily walked to the base of the tree. The villagers bowed their heads, not in fear, but in reverence. For in that moment, they knew they were not just watching a girl, they were witnessing the rise of something their ancestors had tried to destroy. Emily placed her hand on the bark. The tree glowed gold. And from its highest branch, a new fruit blossomed, larger, brighter than any before. It bore her name. She was now the matriarch of memory. Not a ruler of people, but a guardian of truth. And Sondaru was reborn, not through power or punishment, but through remembrance. The land began to heal. The wind learned to sing again. The goats resumed their simple ways, though they always watched the villagers with a knowing stillness. And when children asked why the tree glowed, their parents would kneel, press their palms to the earth, and say, "This is where memory lives. This is where we learn to speak its name." Years rolled by, and Daru village transformed into something beyond the simple dirt paths and wooden huts it had once been. It became a sanctuary, a sacred ground where people journeyed from far and wide. Pilgrims came seeking wisdom, forgiveness, and the chance to speak with the great tree that stood at the heart of the village, a tree pulsing with stories, lives, and truths long hidden beneath silence. Emily no longer belonged fully to the world of humans. She moved like a shadow between two realms, the living present and the echoes of the past. She had become the guardian of remembrance, a bridge woven from time itself. To some, she was a legend whispered around fires; to others, a spirit felt in the rustle of leaves and the soft blink of glowing eyes watching in the night. Children grew up hearing tales of the girl who slept with goats, a cruel nickname once thrown at her by the village's unkind tongues. Yet those fortunate enough to meet her in dreams or visions knew her as the mother of memory, a presence that held the tangled web of history with gentle but unyielding hands. She was neither bound by seasons nor age; she was timeless, an ever-present witness to the stories that shaped lives. Nia, her stepsister, had returned to Daru after many seasons in the forest. The years had bent her frame and softened the sharp edges of bitterness she once carried. She came as a humble pilgrim, her heart heavy with regret and longing for forgiveness. Her eyes, once clouded with envy, now shimmered with the weight of lessons learned among the silent trees and creatures she had been forced to live with. Emily welcomed Nia without anger, for she knew the slow, aching work of healing was not punishment but grace. Under the boughs of the great memory tree, Emily plucked a glowing fruit and handed it to her sister. "Take this," Emily said softly. "Within it is the memory of who you were, who you could be." Nia bit into the fruit, and visions flooded her mind, the faces of their ancestors, the truth of their lineage, the songs that once filled the skies of Daru. Tears streamed down her face as she remembered not only the wrongs she had done but the woman she might still become. The villagers watched quietly, some wiping away tears, others bowing their heads in solemn respect. The circle of healing continued, not with the fury of old but with the quiet power of remembrance. As the stars gathered to witness the night, Emily walked once more to the goat pen, the place where her story had begun, where her suffering had once seemed like an end. She lay down gently on the cool earth, the familiar scent of sage and moss wrapping around her like a cloak. The goats gathered silently, their eyes glowing warmly in the dark, not with pity or fear, but with reverence and love. Around her, the eyes of the rememberers blinked softly in the shadows, like guardian flames against the night's chill. Emily closed her eyes, her breath slow and even. She was no longer just a girl abandoned to the cold night, but a living memory, rooted in the earth, blossoming in the hearts of those who dared to remember. When they made her sleep in the goat pen, they thought they'd buried her. But they had only planted memory.